Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hassan, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today? We just wrapped up Thursday Night Football, as you talked about right before we got on air. What an absolute thriller between the Falcons and the Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, it was not the team I wanted to win. Now that the Falcons are 2-0 in the division and now tied for first with the Bucks right now.
Why why would you not want the Falcons to win? I feel like you would not want the Bucks to win because they're 3-1 would be 4-1.
Yeah, but I'd rather them be 4-1 and 1-0 in the division than the Falcons tying the
Good
record
point.
being 3-2, but now having a 2-0 record in the division and having one of the games over on the Saints for the division.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I didn't think of it like that. I guess I don't really have to worry about that issue because the Vikings are 4-0. But yeah, so anyways, guys, we just finished Thursday Night Football. Obviously a tremendous game. My guy, Kirk Cousins. Kirktober is a real thing, guys. Goes for 509 yards, 4 touchdowns, that lone interception. Drake London, tremendous performance. I'm trying to think of some other guys. Mike Evans was solid. Godwin was average. But all in all, I mean, it was what 36-30, so that's going to produce a lot of fantasy value and a lot of points. We're hoping to produce a lot of fantasy value and a lot of points by our start, sit, sleepers, and bust for Week 5 here in the NFL. Obviously, we're not going to be covering the Thursday night game for obvious reasons. But we're going to go ahead and give you guys the Sunday and Monday start, sit, sleepers, and busts that you guys will need, hopefully, to help your teams have success. But yeah, also, I want to throw out, I did call that Kirk Cousins was going to have his breakout game for Atlanta today. So just wanted to throw that out there. I was waiting for Kirk Cousins to do it. We'll see if he can sustain it. But enough of Kirk Cousins loving. Why don't you go ahead and give me your first start this week?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Jordan Addison. Last week is first week back from the injury week one or from week one. Missed 2 weeks there. First game back, 3 receptions, 72 yards, a touchdown there. One of the big things, the Sauce Gardner is going to be on Jay Jettas the entire game. And honestly, no disrespect to the Jets defense, but I have no idea who the cornerback two is after Sauce on the team right now. And their defense has been great, but they also haven't gone against a firepower like how the Vikings have been this year. Especially being one of the most one of my takes from last year, one of the most legit 4-0 teams in the league. I've been doing it at all levels. And I think Addison's going to have a big game. I believe his snap count was lower because they're trying to get him back into the game a little bit more, back into game rhythm after missing 2 games there. I expect him to probably have closer, maybe 5, 6 catches in this game. I don't know if he repeats a touchdown, but if he has 5, 6 catches, I'm expecting him to come close to that 75-yard mark. He's definitely going to be a great wide receiver too, especially with a lot of the buys this week or a flex option depending on how deep your team is.
So my first start this week is going to be Ramondre Stevenson. I feel like I've been kind of saying the Ramondre Stevenson starting abilities, especially as of late. Obviously, had a good first 2 weeks at Cincinnati and against Seattle. A really bad last 2 weeks, especially at the at the Jets, and then last week at the 49ers. It's interesting going into this week. I know that Gerard Mayo said that Antonio Gibson, who's currently the RB2, may start over Ramondre because of Ramondre's fumbling issues. Although I think that could be overall a possibility, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. You recently just signed Ramondre Stevenson to an extension. I think this was more of a scare tactic, which I think is good because I think Ramondre needs a little fire lit up his ass, not because of his fantasy value. There's only so much he can control with that horrendously bad offensive line. But I still think that he's going to start, regardless, he's going to get good playing time, and he's actually able to go up against a semi easier defense. Although Miami's still got a pretty stifling defense, it's a lot easier to face Miami at home as far as Ramondre is concerned, as opposed to traveling to the Jets and traveling to the 49ers. So I like the matchup. Yeah, his fumbling issues are a bit of a concern. It doesn't really affect me too much. The only thing I'm concerned about the fumbling issues is if it continues and if action needs to be taken, like Gibson starts over Ramondre. But as of now, at least this week, I think a good bounce back week. I think Ramondre definitely will get back to that 15-ish points per game that he did early on. Okay, your second start.
I gotta go with Jane Daniels, especially with a lot of questions on the quarterback position. Like if you have Anthony Richardson, Jane Daniels would have been a perfect safety blanket, similar type of quarterback. And I think the big thing with Daniels is his completion percentage. He's at 82.1% right now. Has just under 900 yards. Yes, he only has 3 passing touchdowns and only one interception. I believe his one interceptions came just this past week, but his value on the ground as well, his rush attempts there I mean, it's just his rushing touchdown, that ability they're able to move around. One big things about the Browns defensively is they rely a lot on their linebackers for coverage and also their D line to contain the quarterback. Jay Daniels, there's almost no way to contain him, and he's up there in that running category, obviously with Lamar, Anthony Richardson, all those top runners at the quarterback position. And I expect to have another good week. I think this is going to be maybe a little bit more of a low scoring game, maybe closer to like a 23-20 type of game. But I expect Jane Daniels to have at least one rushing touchdown this game. I think that he could push over 100 rushing yards in this game, maybe closer to like 150 to or 175, 200 passing yards. But again, if he's able to give you 100 on the ground and at least one rushing touchdown and probably a passing touchdown there, I mean, that's all the value in the world, especially with a lot of how a lot of quarterbacks haven't been performing that well. I mean, you have guys like Sam Darnold and Justin Fields who are top 5, top 10 fantasy quarterbacks right now.
So for me, my second start's going to be Trevor Lawrence. I know he has not had the ideal season. I was actually really high on him. I thought he was going to have kind of a breakout campaign. Not to say that he's not going to moving forward, it just hasn't been there at the moment. He did show improvement last week. He had his best game fantasy wise with 14 and a half fantasy points on 169 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. He hasn't had more over 220 yards in a game, which is a little bit interesting. And he hasn't had more than 2 touchdowns, but at least he showed momentum in those matchups. On top of that, the first 3 out of 4 games have been on the road, which is difficult for any quarterback in the NFL. He had a good week last week against a divisional opponent at Houston. He gets another divisional opponent in Indianapolis, which I think is going to be a little bit lesser of a firepower defense, which will open up the opportunities for him to throw the ball more efficiently. But all in all, I think, this is a point where Lawrence can get 17, 18 points. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I think he'll have his best game and continue that momentum moving forward. And I'm really hoping, and I think will happen, is Trevor Lawrence, maybe after this week, kind of like Kirk Cousins this week, will be able to kind of turn the page and actually have success week in and week out for your fantasy teams. Okay, your final start.
Yeah, so I'm going to stay in that same game. I'm going to go with Michael Pittman. And this is just solely if Anthony Richardson's out and Joe Flacco's in. I mean, once Flacco came in to that game, it was a whole different Michael Pittman. Had the most targets so far this season at 9, most receptions at 6, had 113 yards, which more than doubled his total yards through the first 3 weeks there. I mean, if Joe Flacco's in, I mean, we've seen him be a gunslinger. We saw the connection he had with Mari Cooper last year when he took over. I think right now that's exactly what this Colts offense needs. Richardson's turning the ball over too much. There isn't a lot going on the offensive side except for Jonathan Taylor. I mean, except our deep plays, 60-yard bombs is really about all you get, and that's not Pittman's game. But if Flacco's in for this game, I think Pittman's the perfect wide receiver for him, especially going up against this Jags defense, who has led the second most passing yards so far at 1,135. They've also allowed 6 passing touchdowns to no interceptions. I mean, this could be also the dream scenario for Anthony Richardson going against a defense who hasn't had a single interception when Richardson's had an interception problem. But Pittman wasn't able to be stopped last week, had a good amount of yards there. And honestly, I think if Flacco's in, he'll have an even better day. But if A-Rich is in and they actually let him throw a little bit, intermediate routes, not just the 60-yard bombs every single play, or what he goes for every single play, I think Pittman could have a huge game.
My final must start is going to be Xavier Worthy. Now, I like Xavier Worthy before the Rashee Rice injury, and now I like him even more. Obviously, Hollywood Brown has already been on IR. Rashee Rice is on IR. There's a lot of, I think, speculation that he probably tore his ACL. He's for sure going to miss the next 4 games. But Xavier Worthy on the depth chart immediately emerges as the wide receiver 1 on this team, which really isn't a bad thing, but it does put a lot of pressure on a guy like him. Obviously, you have Kelsey. He's had a little bit of a down year, picked it up as of late. But other than that, I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, McCall Hardman, these are guys that are going to get opportunities, don't get me wrong, but this is Xavier Worthy's time. They obviously drafted him out of the draft to get a kind of Tyreek Hill talent. He hasn't had more than 3 receptions in a game, which was last week. He had a best in yards as well at 73 with a touchdown. He's a big play guy, kind of like Tyreek Hill. But regardless, I think he's going to get 7, 8 receptions. I think he's a for sure must start. I think a lot of people need to be starting him. And if for some reason he's available in your fantasy leagues, you got to go out and pick him up or try to trade for him right now. Because this is a guy that's going to be a number 1 target, number 2 target, depending on how you pick Kelsey as a target for a very long time. I shouldn't say very long time. Well, longevity wise if you're in dynasty leagues, but a very good chunk of time, potentially with Rashee Rice, at least missing the next 4 games, if not longer, possibly the entire year. On top of that, for the Chiefs, Monday night matchup against your New Orleans Saints, are going to come back home after a 2-game spam. The offense is going to be looking to continue its momentum moving forward. Okay, what about your first sit?
I got Brock Purdy going against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals have really only been bad against quarterbacks who are mobile so far this year. The two bad games they played was in Week 1 against the Bills with Josh Allen, who's obviously a mobile quarterback, and then just last week with Jayden Daniels, a very mobile quarterback. But if you go back to the Lions game, Jared Goff, not the most mobile quarterback, only had 199 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception there. If you go to the Rams game, an interdivisional game, only 216 yards, no touchdowns, but also no interceptions there. I mean, mobile quarterbacks have been fine against this Cardinals defense, but if you're a pocket quarterback like how Purdy is, more of a system quarterback, they've been able to be all over him. I mean, the Lions, in my opinion, is one of the best offenses in the league, and they were able to completely shut down that wide receiver, that quarterback room there. Goff. Goff didn't have a receiving touchdown like I did last week against them, and Purdy doesn't have the same type of rushing upside as a Jared Goff. I mean, Purdy, yes, he's going to get some of his weapons back. I think Ayuk should be a little more healthy. Deebo Samuel is coming back this second week back. This will be his second week back from injury. Kittle, I believe, should be back this week. Uh, Obviously, CMC, he's not going to be back for a while, but you still have Jordan Mason there. I just don't see him doing well. I mean, the track record has shown so far this year that those non-mobile quarterbacks, they've been able to get to them. They've been able to keep them under 250 yards. Only has a lot of one touchdown to those non-mobile quarterbacks. Guys like Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels, who's able to create more time with their legs. They've been great this year, so I'm not starting Brock Purdy.
I'm going to go with 3 quarterbacks for my sits. The first is going to be Caleb Williams. I believe I had said to avoid Caleb Williams last week, especially after he had his best week of the season in week 3 with 17 fantasy points. Last week, only 159 yards with 1 touchdown, 5 carries for 12 yards. I think he's got the tools and talents he needs to be successful. I just don't think he's been able to put it together. He's going against Carolina, and although Carolina is not a good team sitting at 1-3, their defense has had some momentum just because their offense has finally had some momentum with Andy Dalton moving forward. Carolina doesn't have the best of defense. I understand that. But Caleb Williams is one of those guys that he's a rookie. He hasn't looked great. I need a couple good performances from Caleb Williams to consistently put him in and week out. There are a lot of surrounding tools for Caleb Williams, guys like DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, the bunch of running backs that they have. But for now, I need to see a couple 17-plus week or 15, 16, 17-point weeks consistently to feel like he's a reliable option to use, especially as a rookie, especially as a guy like Jayden Daniels is completely outperforming Caleb Williams early on to start their careers. Okay, what about your second sit?
I'm going to go with Aaron Jones, and I agree. Yeah, he's been great so far this year. He's only really had one bad game back in week 2 against the 49ers, 9 carries, 32 yards, but did have 5 receptions there. But one of the big things is the Jets defense. They've only allowed 514 total rushing yards, only 3 rushing touchdowns up to this point. Aaron Jones does give you that, a little bit more of that upside in the receiving game for this offense, but it's also a weird game. It's being played at 6:30 in the morning. I believe they're in London. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of offensive struggles on both teams. I know that you're going to especially hate getting up that early to watch that game. Uh, but yeah, I
Yeah,
think offensive
especially
struggles are
just to
going to
throw
be
this out there, I'm gonna have a long night on Saturday. So the fact that I have to wake up and for me it's 8:30, which is not 6:30. But when I was in Ridgecrest when we played the Saints, it was 6:30, and that sucked.
Yeah, that did. I do remember that day because we had study hall that day, so I had to wake up like 4 hours earlier than I normally would have, and then still had study hall later. But yeah, Aaron Jones has been great, but this run defense of the Jets, just this defense entirely by the Jets has been great. And like I said, I think there's gonna the first half a lot of struggles. It's a weird game, weird time. It seems like that's how it is with those London games. It turns out being like a 13-10 total at the very end, and it's a shootout. It's like a game-winning field goal or a game-winning drive. And that seems like how those London games, those overseas games have been going. So Aaron Jones, I'm fading him, especially for just how well this defense has played.
Yeah, the game-winning field goals really do the Vikings well in London. And Greg Joseph nailed that kick against the Saints. So, no, yeah, London gonna be an interesting one to say the least. For me, my second sit's going to be Jordan Love. Again, Jordan Love, I think I had talked about, kind of fading Jordan Love last week. Stat-wise, he had 28 fantasy points. You look at his stats as a whole, 32 for 54, 389, 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. I feel like a lot of those fantasy points were really fluctuated just because the Packers were down, like I think it was 28-3 or 28-0 Kind of like when the Vikings were down with the Colts, like Kirk Cousins had 460 yards at the end of the game's end, right? Because you're losing by that much, just going to pass, pass, pass. So the numbers obviously fluctuate. I was obviously watching that game as a Vikings fan, and Jordan Love just did not look comfortable. It's interesting with quarterbacks when they have, like a leg injury, they, especially early on, struggle to really gain their composure and gain their confidence and trusting the backside of their leg. And Jordan Love didn't look comfortable throwing the football at all. I understand he threw for 389 yards, but if that game was closer from the jump, I think this is a far different situation. He would be maybe 250 or less, a couple less touchdowns, and his fantasy points really wouldn't look great. He is going into an interesting matchup at the Rams. I believe this is one of those like 425 Eastern kicks. I don't know if it's America's game of the week, but still, there's always some fluctuating performances there as well. I don't think Jordan Love's necessarily a bad fantasy quarterback. I think he's just a bad fantasy option this week, especially still kind of trying to get back from that injury. Obviously, I think a lot of the rust came off last week, but you don't really know what you're to expect. And you're going into a difficult road environment in Los Angeles. So I'm fading Jordan Love this week in particular. All right, your final sit.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Matthew Stafford. Stafford, since losing his two wide receivers in Puka and Cup, just haven't been good. This past couple weeks, San Francisco 2 weeks ago, only 221 yards, only one passing touchdown. And last week against the Bears, 224 passing yards, no touchdowns and an interception. We also know with Matthew Stafford, this part of his career, he's not giving you any type of rushing upside. And yeah, just against the Packers also. If it was in Green Bay, it would definitely be even more of a sit. They are at home. But one of the things about the Packers, yes, they've given up over 1,000 yards and they're bottom 5 or bottom 10 in the league. But they've given up 8 passing touchdowns, but they also have 8 interceptions this year. I just don't trust these wide receivers. That's the biggest part. I love Matthew Stafford. I think he just broke the top 10 for all-time passing yards just last week. He's right behind Aaron Rodgers right now. But these wide receivers, I just can't trust them. I mean, Jordan Whittington, Tutu Atwell, Kobe Parkins are your top 3 targets right there. Yeah, you still have Kyron out of the backfield, but there's only so much Stafford can do with those type of guys. And going against defense who's been able to create turnovers, who's have great linebackers there, probably one of my favorite linebacking groups, and really good DBs. I just can't trust the weapons that he has, so I have to sit him.
My final set's going to be Derek Carr. Now, Derek Carr obviously had a good start to the season, 21-21. Last 2 weeks been a little bit disappointing, right at about 8 fantasy points. He's had an interception in each of his last 3 games. I'm sure as a Saints fan, you are well aware of that. I just wanted to remind you of that. It's not that I don't think Derek Carr is necessarily a bad quarterback. He's actually performed really overall pretty solid this season, besides obviously those 2 games. It's the fact that he's struggling a little bit, and to make things worse, he's got to go into Kansas City on a Monday night game, which is never easy to say the least. It's never easy to go into Kansas City, let alone during a Monday night game. Monday night games aren't usually great for quarterbacks, so it's another reason why I'm fading him here. But at least he had a lot of good starting points. I mean, as far as his first 2 games of the year, and I do believe that if you have Derek Carr, he's going to get back to that landscape moving forward as far as production. After Kansas City, they got 2 home games against the Buccaneers and the Broncos. Playing at home, especially in New Orleans, is going to be really beneficial for him. But he gets the yards, he gets overall touchdowns. The biggest thing is, can he shave that interceptions that he's been throwing and maybe get back to the 2-3 touchdowns that he had in the first 2 weeks. All right, let's go into sleepers. Give me your first sleeper.
Trey Sermon, especially if Jonathan Taylor's out this game, there's a good chance that I believe it's a high ankle sprain or it's some type of ankle sprain. You correct me if I'm wrong, but that's
I
something
think that's
Jonathan
what it
Taylor.
is.
Jonathan Taylor, that's exactly what he had, I believe, 2 years ago that took him out for most of the year was an ankle sprain. Lingered around. I think they're going to have to maybe sit him for a week or two. I mean, especially if Joe, like I said, this also kind of combines with the Joe Flacco thing. Uh, if Joe Flacco's in there, I mean, that rushing upside goes all to Tracer. Before it would have been a lot more Anthony Richardson we would have saw, but if Richardson's also out, I mean, Sermon's going to have to step up. He's going to be the RB1. I think he's probably going to get majority of the carries, probably be like an 80-20 split out of that back room there. He's someone that you're able to go pick up last minute waivers, especially if you have Jonathan Taylor. That's one of those guys that you can kind of just wait until the last minute once a report comes out that if he's out or injured, I would go pick up Sermon, especially against this Jags defense. Jags defense hasn't been good at all. I believe they have allowed 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns up to this point, right around 500 rushing yards. I mean, they're right in the middle of the pack. just everything. And this game could be a blowout, as you said. Potentially could be a little more high scoring game uh, with the Jags. Lawrence Taylor or Trevor Lawrence, as you said. But I don't know. I think that this Joe Flacco's in that even more value for Trey Sermon.
So mine's going to be a collection. It's going to be the Bengals running backs. I know they're going into Baltimore. It's going to be at home, which is going to be nice. But the Bengals running backs did tremendous last week as a whole. Last week, Zach Moss had 17.8 fantasy points and Chase Brown had 23.2. So they combined for 40 fantasy points. And that's obviously great out the running back position. They also combined for 30 carries on the day, 130 yards, and 3 total touchdowns. Do I expect that same performance, going from at Carolina to home against a divisional matchup against Baltimore? No, but that's why I put them as a sleeper. I think you can definitely pick one. If I were to pick one, I'd pick Zach Moss just of consistency this year. Zach Moss, 14, 20, and 17 are his 3 highest point totals from his first 4 weeks. Chase Brown obviously has the highest total in general, which was like 23 points last week, but Zach Moss is a little bit more consistent. The Bengals have obviously been sitting in a precarious position ever since they started the year 0-3. Joe Burrow hasn't necessarily looked bad. There's been obviously some off the field issues that they've had with contracts and things like that. But I think maybe the Bengals' core, at least for this year, to find success is running the football efficiently. And either of these Bengals running backs is going to be a good option. If I had to pick one, I'd pick Zach Moss. I don't think both repeat the same production, but who knows, especially if the Ravens are scoring offense at a premium, to say the least, this week. Okay, your second sleeper.
Chuba Hubbard. I think he's still pretty widely available in a lot of leagues, and I mean, the future right now, it's going to be Andy Dalton at quarterback. Since Andy Dalton's taken over, Chuba Hubbard, 114 yards, 5 receptions, 55 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown 2 weeks ago against the Raiders. Last week against Cincinnati, 104 yards, a rushing touchdown, 4 receptions for 17 yards. I mean, he's going to get production. I mean, good quarterback play, it will equal good running back play there for him. I mean, he was a great college running back there from Oklahoma State. Just kind of went to a bad situation and has finally started to break out at the end of last year when they started really giving him a lot of carries. And then this year, I mean, they've given him a good amount of carries. I know Jonathan Brooks or Jordan Brooks, I don't remember his name, the rookie running back. He's supposed to be back like maybe this week, probably next week. But either way, Chuba Hubbard for this week going against this defense, who's middle of the tier of the Bears on the ground. They've given up 5 rushing touchdowns, 500 yards on the year. So that means at this point they've given up over 100 rushing yards a game through 4 weeks. That 125, I believe, it would average out to. Chuba Hubbard, I mean, he's getting, I think, I want to say 75% of the snaps or the carry shares there in Carolina, and he's been a good receiving back. He's had a touchdown every game. He's had over 100 yards. I think that keeps on going here.
Yeah, I mean, I have Chuba Hubbard as well as my second sleeper. I honestly really wasn't having Chuba Hubbard on my radar, so I was just randomly looking at ESPN Fantasy this week to kind of prepare for the upcoming Starts at Sleepers and Bust show. And I saw Chuba Hubbard. I'm like, man, I kind of forgot about this guy because the Panthers have had a plethora of running backs with like Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks. Obviously, he's been unable to perform or play this season so far. I believe he's already ruled out for week 5. Week 6 is the earliest that he'll come back. Depending on where the Panthers are at, they may not rush him back if he needs another week or two. But as of now, you got to take advantage of Chuba Hubbard because when Jonathan Brooks is able to play in the NFL, they're either going to split carries or Brooks is going to completely take over. But Chuba Hubbard obviously was slow in his first 2 games when Bryce Young was quarterback, but his last 2 weeks, as you mentioned, with Andy Dalton at the quarterback position, over 100 yards rushing, 29 points or 27.9 points and 22.1. So you already kind of laid out everything there. Chicago's got a banged up defense that's not really great with an offense that's not even much better. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for the Panthers. I think eventually with Andy Dalton at quarterback, they're going to eventually hit a wall, but Chuba Hubbard is definitely going to be able to have potential for success and a guy that not too many people are talking about and probably won't be talking about for a couple more weeks down the line when Jonathan Brooks hopefully is able to come back and really show why the Panthers went out and got a guy like Brooks. But Chuba Hubbard is carrying the fort right now for the Panthers, and the Panthers offense is rolling. So you got to buy high on that, especially if you got these guys before they all go to waste. Okay, your final sleeper.
I'm going to go with my boy BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr. He's going against a really bad Colts pass defense. They're bottom 10 in the NFL. They've already given up over 1,000 yards this year, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But I'm kind of on the train also that this this has to be a game for Trevor Lawrence. He has to bounce back, and there's a good chance it is against this really bad Colts defense this year. One of my favorite stats about Brian Thomas Jr. is that he's averaging 16.2 yards per reception as a rookie. And the other part is these last 2 weeks, his target numbers have gone up. First 2 weeks, it was 4-4. These past 2 weeks have been 9-9. If he's able to sit right around that 10 targets per game, I love that for him. He's able to catch around 5, maybe 6 balls a game, able to get you that 16 yards per reception. I mean, that's easily 60 yards with for 5 receptions. I mean, that's good wide receiver two numbers out there. He's had 2 touchdowns in 4 games there. He shows some rushing upside. Last week had a jet sweep for 13 yards. I mean, they're slowly starting to really get him into his offense. I know Neighbors has really taken over as that rookie wide receiver, but I think Brian Thomas Jr. can be that easily wide receiver too, like plug and play almost every week if they keep on evolving him into this offense.
So my final sleeper is going to be Trey Tucker. Now, I honestly didn't really know too much about Trey Tucker until the last couple of weeks. A member of the Las Vegas Raiders, Trey Tucker is one of those guys that not many people knew too much about, especially until week 3 and week 4. Week 3, 22.6 points. Last week, 15.4. Devontae Adams remains sidelined with a hamstring injury. I believe he's going to be out week 5 as well. On top of him being ruled out with a hamstring injury, I feel like the trade speculation with Adams has continued to stir and has really risen the past couple of days. And I really wouldn't be surprised if he's traded before week 6. And I know there's a little bit of a hamstring issue, but the Raiders and Devontae Adams have kind of came to a mutual agreement that he wants out. And usually when this happens, that's when trades start to become active. Maybe a team like the Chiefs, probably not going to happen, trading in division, but a team that needs another receiver could be added to the mix, or even paired him alongside Aaron Rodgers back with Garrett Wilson. So I do think that Devontae Adams is going to get traded. I honestly think probably before week 6, so after this week, just because a lot of these teams are going to need to, obviously look to contend. The Raiders are asking a steep price and whatnot. Anyways, with Devontae Adams most likely out, Trey Tucker is a guy that can develop into a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 role. He had that rushing touchdown last week, but he's obviously very versatile in the passing game. And again, not too many people are talking about him. They're going into Denver, which Denver, obviously, it's a tough place to play. It's tough to play on the road in the division, especially in Denver. But I think Trey Tucker could get back to his week 3 game where he had 7 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown easy. And a guy that you could filter into your flex position, especially in those deeper leagues where you're looking for some guys to kind of fill the boats and have success moving forward. All right, let's go ahead and get to your first bust.
I'm going to go with Jamar Chase. And you can look at the Ravens defense, and yes, they've given up the third amount most passing yards here, but it really hasn't been to wide receivers. Go back to week 1 against the Chiefs. Rashee Rice, yes, 7 receptions, 103 yards. I believe that's the most yards they've led to any wide receiver one. Against Devontae Adams, has had a solid game there, but you look at especially these past 2 weeks. The leading wide receiver or leading pass catcher for the Cowboys when they played wasn't CeeDee Lamb, it was Jake Ferguson. You go back to just last week against the Bills. The Bills had to throw a lot in that game, and their leading wide receiver was Khalil Shakir with only 62 yards. I mean, this defense the last 2 weeks, especially the pass defense against wide receiver ones, has been much better. Jamar Chase has also been very shaky, going up against, in my opinion, not the best O-line for the Bengals. The O-line for the Bengals have given up a good amount of pressure so far this year, and Joe Burrow, not the most mobile quarterback. We've seen that throughout his career. He's able to move a little bit here and there, but with injuries piling up, especially those last couple of years, he's been more of a pocket passer there. And this Ravens D-line has been able to get after the quarterback. That's going to force Joe Burrow to have to go more of those underneath routes. He has one of the other things about Jamar is that he's relied on that big play touchdown these past 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago against Washington, he had a 41-yard touchdown. That really kicked off the game. And then if you go back to last week, he had a 63-yard touchdown there, which if you take that away, he would have only had 2 receptions for 23 yards. So against those wide receiver ones these past 2 weeks, this Ravens defense has been able to figure out. Marlon Humphrey's able to figure out as of recently. I just don't see Chase having the biggest game.
So for me, I'm going to go with Jawan Jennings, and I feel like Jawan Jennings is a guy that is kind of an interesting bust here. But as of now, all 3 wide receivers, I believe, are back, and I'm talking about Ayuk, Samuel, Kittle. I know Kittle is questionable with an injury. I believe he hasn't really practiced this week. There is still some optimism that he'll play, but regardless, That's three options in Jawan Jennings. Obviously, when the guys were out, Jawan Jennings had a masterful game. 11 receptions for 175 yards and three touchdowns. Last week, three receptions for 88 yards, had that huge reception. Other than that, was relatively quiet. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at Jawan Jennings as a guy that's going to continue to have this sustained success, and I just don't see that happening. I know the 49ers offense is rolling, especially with Brock Purdy at the quarterback position, but I just don't see him continuing to stack up these big performances. And even if he does, they're spotty, right? He could go from 46.5, and the week before he had 5.7. So you just never really know with Jawan Jennings, and those guys are always dangerous to play with, especially if all three, Ayuk, Samuel, and Kittle, are back. I think Jawan Jennings' production is going to go down. Even if Kittle is not there, I still think his production is going to relatively look about the same. Looking at his receptions 2, 3, 5, and 11, it's hard to say that Jawan Jennings is consistently a guy like Samuel or Ayuk, getting 10 plus carries a game. All right, your second bust.
I'm gonna go Travis Kelsey, and I get it that Rashee Rice isn't gonna be there. Kelsey's gonna have to step up. Last week he had his best week so far, 7 receptions, 89 yards. But I still just don't trust Kelsey, and I really like the Saints linebacking group. Last week the Saints didn't have Demario Davis, but now they're gonna have Demario Davis back this week. Pete Warner's back, two really good coverage linebackers, and they've only really allowed one big game out of a tight end, and that was against the Eagles 2 weeks ago, and that was mainly because they left, I think it was like a 45, 50-yard reception to Dallas Goedert at the end of the game. If you take that away from him, that takes away a good amount of his yards that he had. He did have a great day as a whole, but if you look at all the other tight ends that they've played against, they haven't really been able to do anything. Uh, like Kyle Pitts didn't have a big game. Ferguson wasn't a part of that Saints game against the Panthers. They don't really have a true tight end. But I just really like the coverage linebackers that the Saints have there. They are missing out on Willie Gay Jr. He did break his forearm, I believe, break his hand. But like I said, Demario Davis was injured last week. He's one of the better coverage linebackers right there with Kelsey. That will be lined up with Kelsey. And Kelsey, yes, he had a big game, but we saw what he was able to do with no Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice was out towards the beginning of that game, and yes, he had under 100 yards. He only had 7 receptions, and like if that's your big game that you're getting out of Kelsey, you're just gonna be even more disappointed.
For me, I'm going to go with Noah Fant. This one pains me as an Iowa Hawkeye fan. I was hoping one of these years Noah Fant would really kind of emerge himself as not necessarily a top tier tight end, but a tight end that could do something. And he's shown some signs of it a little bit more, particularly in week 3, we had 6 catches for 60 yards, but last week, 2 catches for 26 yards. He also is dealing with a toe injury, so he might not play. But regardless if he does play, it's going to be tough for him to get volume. Honestly, looking at the receivers, Lockett's always does better than I expect him to, but he got Lockett, Metcalf, and JSN. It's really hard to get those reps if you're Noah Fant, especially when you got guys like Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet at the running back position. On top of that, Fant's a really good run blocking tight end, which is why they use him more in the run blocking as opposed to pass catching. But all in all, I was really hoping for a good season from Noah Fant. Not saying that it's not going to happen, but it's definitely going to be a lot harder, especially if this toe issue continues to plague him throughout the season. But again, for Seattle going into this matchup here this week against the New York Giants, there's an opportunity for growth and success. But I'm kind of shying away from Noah Fant because he's only had one game of 12, which was his best, and the rest has been like anywhere from 3 to 6. So shying away from him unless you're in a deeper league and are looking for a tight end that could maybe sneak away towards the goal line and get a touchdown. All right, your final bust.
Yeah, I'm actually going to stay right there in that same game. It's Tyler Lockett. I mean, JSN's finally emerged, it feels like, this year. I think one of the biggest things, if you look at his route tree last year, he ran like 4 different routes the entire year, essentially. If you look at his route tree this year, I think he's ran five, no, not five, like 12 to 13 different routes up to this point, and has been way more successful. He's that number 2 wide receiver there. Lockett, it's not that two wide receiver. One of the things I will say though with Lockett, he does get a good amount of targets still. I mean, his lowest game was two back in week 2. But outside of that, 7, 8, and 9 targets, 5 to 6 catches. But there's got to be a point where they just got to be like, hey, Lockett, you're getting too old. Like JSN, DK Metcalf, we got to throw someone else out there who's on the younger side. We got to try to get them to mold together. And in this type of game against the Giants suck. I mean, their pass defense has been a little bit better, I guess, but it's been blowout games. So teams really haven't been having to pass to them or against them in the second half of games here. I think Lockett could get you receptions, maybe 40 yards there. But outside of that, I think this is finally the year Jason puts the final nail in the coffin for Tyler Lockett's fantasy value.
My final bust is going to be Ezekiel Elliott. I'm officially putting the nail in the coffin. There was some optimism in week one when he had 10 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown, but since then it's been very disappointing. 5.2, 2.2, and 3.4 fantasy points. 5 carries, 19 yards there. He actually also didn't practice today because of dehydration. I'm not calling him a wuss. It just was kind of interesting to see that he was a little bit dehydrated. It's probably because of that belly that he has been rocking with recently. But all in all, Zeke, it just seems like his time's up. I was really hoping for a good reunion from Zeke, and maybe the Cowboys would be able to kind of get him back to not necessarily the Zeke that he was, but kind of hand him that Zeke, Rico Dowdle 1-2 punch like they did with Zeke and Tony Pollard, and it just hasn't been the case. So there was some optimism after week one when he put up some numbers, but it looks like that optimism slowly has faded away, and it will continue to fade away unless something sparks it or they find ways to get him more involved. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to say the least. But unfortunately, I think Zeke's time has come to an end, at least as far as fantasy value relevancy is concerned. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focus and memory? Look no further than the Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports AZ and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining an ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.